His tone-deaf closing speech at the Invictus Games on Saturday night as he lectured about forgiveness and living in the present. Watch.
You've shown us the power in not defining people by assumption or their backstory or past pain, but rather instead on their ability, how they show up, and who they are in the present.
Critics have urged the Duke to practice what he preaches, especially when it comes to reconciling with his shunned father-in-law, Thomas Markle. Meghan's lovely father made another desperate TV plea for a reunion with his estranged daughter, Meghan, on Good Morning Britain today. It's really heartbreaking stuff. Watch.
I'm open to it at any time, but I don't see it coming. She's not the person I knew as my daughter.
Do you blame Harry for that?
I don't know. I don't know. I blame her or Harry. I think she had influence on Harry more than he does on her.
So, Lady C, firstly, great to see Thomas regaining his voice after that stroke that nearly took his life. But shouldn't the hypocritical Duke apply the same philosophy that he espoused at the Invictus Games to his dying and ostracised father-in-law?
Well, of course, Harry's not going to apply the same principles to his father-in-law that he applies to himself and everybody else, because the man is an arch hypocrite. You know, the fact of the matter is Thomas Markle never did anything wrong at all. Thomas Markle was set up by Jeff Rayner, who is a colleague of Meghan's, and everything evolved from that. I think that Harry really and Meghan both have an absolute nerve the way they have treated her father. I think it's inexcusable, and I honestly think they are never going to be forgiven by anybody who appreciates decency. And all the rhetoric that they can come up with is absolutely meaningless, because actions speak louder than words. Thomas Markle has done nothing to justify being excluded.
I couldn't agree more with that. Should just point out, though, Jeff Rayner, the celebrity photographer, denies any wrongdoing. Phil Dampier, it was heartbreaking, wasn't it, to see Thomas barely able to speak, but desperate, just desperate for his daughter to hear his pleas. He doesn't want to sue for access to his grandchildren. He says that is something he could do under American law. He just wants his daughter and his son-in-law to do the decent thing.
Yeah, good evening, Danny. It was absolutely heartbreaking to watch it. You know, he's still struggling from the stroke. He couldn't speak very well. He seemed close to tears at times. And you just wonder whether, you know, if something happened to him, we've discussed this before, how would Harry and Meghan feel? I wouldn't like to be them if it did. But I was fascinated by that line he came out with, that he could actually sue to see his grandchildren under Californian law. But he probably just doesn't want the hassle. But I'll tell you one thing that did interest me, and I have to say the games were a success. I mean, I think we have to say that to be fair to Harry and Meghan. But I was talking to people out in Dusseldorf, and apparently this whole business of them not talking to the British press, that's all gone out the window now. I think apparently they obviously realised they've sunk so low in people's estimation. Apparently they are now engaging with journalists. So obviously they've decided that they can't do without the press, and they did get a much better press last week. But if they really had warmth and compassion, they'd get in an SUV and drive down and see Thomas before it's too late.
Typical. Can't live with them, can't live without them when it comes to the media. I think Lady C might disagree with you, though, on the Invictus Games being a success. Is that right, Lady C? You disagree?
Sorry, you need to speak up. The sound is appalling.
Sorry, Lady C. Oh, it's my fault. Basically, Phil Dampier said he did think the Invictus Games was a success, and I don't think you agree with that, Lady C, do you?
Well, my understanding is that the Invictus Games has been presented as being a success, and in some respects it's been a great success for Harry and Meghan, but behind the scenes there's been a lot of dissatisfaction certainly in Germany amongst the Germans.
Okay, got it. Well, no, good that we've got both sides of the argument there. Okay, good that we've got both sides of the argument. Now, look, breaking tonight, Prince William has just touched down in New York and said it's good to be back in the USA before visiting a local oyster farm. The Prince of Wales will use the trip to meet up with world leaders, including the UN Secretary-General, and will unveil the Earthshot Prize finalists. Now, the visit comes as a new Times newspaper profile reveals that behind the scenes, William questions many of the ingrained traditions that the royal family has long taken for granted. So, Lady C, this is a big trip for William. Of course, he's made it very clear he's not going to say anything about Harry to any of the American media. This is about him trying to transform into a player on the world stage. But how do you feel about him wanting to burnish many of the traditions that have made the royal family great over the years?
But I think William needs to tread very carefully. You know, if he's not very careful, he will hop onto bandwagons that might turn out to be injurious to his reputation as a future monarch. I think at the moment he's doing softly, and I think he most likely will get it right. But I'm not 100% convinced that I think his focus is a little bit too narrow, and I get what he's about in terms of the big picture, but I really do think he needs to be very careful.
Well, yes, especially Phil Dampier when it comes to this net zero obsession.
Yeah, I'm not a great fan of all the climate change agenda, but I do like the Earthshot Prize because it comes up with, there's 15 finalists he's announcing tomorrow. And he said at the start of it that he wanted it to be optimistic. He didn't want it to be all doom and gloom. Sometimes we all get fed all this stuff and we all think the end of the world is nigh. And I think he wants to inject some optimism. There's no doubt that some of the things that have been produced are great ideas that we can all agree on. But I know what Lady C said.
Yeah, well, I guess we will see how the trip goes and we'll talk about it later in the week. Lady Colin Campbell, Phil Dampier, my Royal Masterminds, thank you both so much.